Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL Podcast.
Yes, welcome in everybody to week number 2 of the NFL 2022 season. Strange old day here in the UK. The strangest bank holiday I've ever gone through. Very sad day, but we're here to review everything that happened in the NFL this week, and that will cheer us up, no doubt, because there was plenty of sheer chaos as usual, guys. We said that word plenty last week, and we're going to say plenty more this week, because boy, oh boy, was there some chaos this week. Let's welcome the boys in. Josh, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, not too bad. Another NFL week, another NFL disappointment for me personally in the cruelest of circumstances. But as I'm talking to you right now, I've got BT Sport on the other line, and the Guardians currently beating the Twins. So, yeah, not bad at all, mate.
Baseball, good Lord. One sport I've never, ever got into. Steve, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, not bad. The NFL continued with chaos, but it was all different themes this week. I think the kickers seemed to find their kicking boots this week. There wasn't so many missed kicks.
Sorry, Steve, carry on.
But all the defenses forgot how to play football. We're going to go into, I'm sure, a lot of it, but a lot of comebacks, a lot of just awful defensive performances. Chaos in a different way. And Dave's been having his way, the agent of chaos, because more strange results, more wins that you didn't expect. I don't think this was probably a week for the gamblers amongst us, because I would imagine that a lot of people picked some teams that just were almost bankers that did not win. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start then, fellas, with what we did last week. Tell me one thing you loved in the NFL this week. Josh, let's start with you, buddy.
I mean, let's just start with the fact that the league was as chaotic as it was this week. 3 massive comeback wins in what seemed to be impossible circumstances. So the Jets, obviously, against the Browns, coming back in one of the most unreal of circumstances, beating the Browns after going 30-17 down with just 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The last time that a team won in such a circumstance was the Bears against the Browns, stupidly enough, in 2003. So that tells you just how unlikely that comeback was. The Dolphins were another team that were down and out against the Ravens. I had a couple of Finns fans texting me going, God, this is just as bad as we thought. And then at the end were texting me all sorts of obscene but, understandable messages at the end of the game after somehow beating the Ravens. They were 35-14 down at the start of the fourth quarter and won that one. And then the Arizona Cardinals, how on earth did the Arizona Cardinals win that game? They were 20-0 down at halftime and 23-7 down at the start of the fourth quarter, and they still won their game as well. And then just to add something else into the mix, gents, 9 out of the 14 games so far this week have finished with a score that is, either 7 points or fewer. That is, how competitive is this league early doors? It's for the neutral, it's fantastic. For the better, it's awful. And if you are partisan to a team that is not exactly keen on keeping consistency and momentum, then it's downright terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. At one point yesterday, both the Browns and the Ravens had a 99.9% win probability rate at different points in their games yesterday, and both managed to lose. I mean, the Cardinals weren't impressive enough, but the other two, my word, could you imagine the odds you could have got in play on that result? I mean, that was just absolutely...
I was just thinking, imagine the accumulator on that, on the Ravens and the Browns losing when they were at 99.9 each, because I think there was a point where both of them were on that at the same time. So, yeah, that would have been quite mad.
would have been absolutely frightening. Just on the Raiders and the Cardinals, as we're talking about that game, you just mentioned it there. Just want to highlight the Kyler Murray 2-point play, which I'm sure everybody has seen now. It's very much Michael Vick, Madden style. Kyler Murray managed to run 85 yards on a 2-point conversion, gents. 85 yards. What
Just
on
committed
earth
man to
is
taking him down. How
Oh,
on earth did no one go
honestly.
to him? It just constant side to side. It was mad. I actually thought that it was. I thought it was a busted play. I thought it was like a penalty. It was just casually rolling from side to side for the fun of it all. But yeah, just how do you not go to the man at the very least? It was a fantastic play.
Yeah, frightening play. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, we'll probably touch a little bit on the Cardinals a little bit later on because potentially papered over a few cracks. Let's just put it that way. Steve, what did you love in week 2, my friend?
So for me, I'm going to go a bit more pointed this week, because last week I was far too broad, as you said. So this week I'm going to go for my old pal Doug Peterson and his Jacksonville Jaguars. They looked an offense unleashed. Trevor Lawrence looked the best he's ever looked in an NFL uniform. I thought he was sublime. That's the Trevor Lawrence we all thought we'd see in the NFL. I thought he was excellent. I think through the first half, up until just before the half, I think he was 12 of 12 with something like 150 passing yards. Like he was really dialed in. Christian Kirk had a great game. You know, some people started to say, "Is that Christian Kirk contract actually a steal?" Because he looked a different player in that Jags uniform, and they were just really good. I love Pedersen's energy. I love that he's not afraid to go for it. He's aggressive on fourth down. That's what Doug Pedersen's always done. They got 2 out of 3 of their fourth down attempts. He's always been aggressive and not afraid to go for it. And they just looked really good. I mean, we'll obviously come on to another conversation about the other side of the ball with the Indianapolis Colts. But yeah, the Jags 1-1. They sit atop perhaps the weakest division in football, but they're atop of it at the moment. And the only way is up. And interestingly, the Indianapolis Colts have only been blown out 3 times in the last, I think it's something like 7 years, maybe longer than that. And all 3 of them have come against Jacksonville. They're just their thorn in their side. They have something against Jacksonville, and brings back memories of the last game of last season where they missed out on the playoffs because they lost to Jacksonville. But no, all full credit to Jacksonville. I thought they looked excellent. I thought they mixed in the pass game with the run game really well. Good to see Travis Etienne back as well, because obviously he missed all last season with, was it Lindstrank, I think he had. He missed all of last season, his rookie year, so good to see him back on the field, and him and Trevor Lawrence bringing over that Clemson chemistry. But yeah, I think the Jaguars are on the up, and some interesting things could happen in that division, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. Like you say, certainly the best Trevor Lawrence has looked. A big shout out as well to James Robinson, because I think he's been feeling Travis Etienne breathing down his neck, and he's responded. In terms of some of the play that he's put out on the field. I'm slightly regretting trading him away in a full 10 yards dynasty league, but there you go. I tried to pick up J.K. Dobbins, and I thought James Robinson would be expandable, but there you go. These things happen. I'm going to be even more pointed. I'm going to not pick out a team. I'm going to pick out a player, and I'm going to tip my cap to Amon-Ra St. Brown, because what a performance yet again from him. Quietly has become one of the premier wide receivers in the league. That might sound like an overreaction, but he's now on a streak of 6 games with at least 8 receptions and 1 receiving touchdown, which is now the longest such streak in the Super Bowl era. And he doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon. He was consistently targeted yet again in the passing game for a Lions offense that has been tremendous in the first 2 weeks. They put up 30 plus in a losing effort, obviously, last week, another 36-point effort this week. They've got a good balance, it would seem, with the ground game. DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams are a nice 1-2 punch. Jared Goff, 4 touchdowns on the day, and like I say, 2 of those went to said Amon-Ra St. Brown. He also added a 58-yard rush as well to show that he was an all-round weapon in that offense. And like I say, very quietly, he really has become a real weapon. Actually, he ended up leading the Lions in rushing as well as receiving with that big 58-yarder on the ground. But yeah, like I say, really big weapon. And as I say, the Lions looking a little bit punchy. We've mentioned a couple of things that we loved. I think we're going to expand our conversation on a few of these teams and a few of the points that we've made. So, Steve, I've put it into your hands this week. I had my overreaction Monday for week 1, and I've asked you to come up with a few statements that you believe after you've watched week number 2. So far away, mate. So I think we're going to retouch on a few of these teams.
Yeah, I think we'll stick in the theme of the NFC North and of the boys in blue, because watching them week 1, obviously against my Eagles, and then watching them again red zone against the Commanders, this Lions team is good. Like, their offense certainly is underrated. I think obviously last year was a bit of a rebuild year. Dan Campbell brought the energy. You know, he brought this team that doesn't give up, that doesn't sort of lay down, not afraid to try things, and they've stuck with a few players. And yes, Jared Goff might not be the most polished passer in the league, but this Lions team is underrated. And I think this Lions team is going to the playoffs. You know, I don't think they're going to finish number 1 in the NFC, you know, but I think with it being expanded to 7 teams this year, we've talked about how much the NFC is weaker than the AFC. And I think those 6 and 7 spots are up for grabs. And with Dak Prescott going down, that opens up all kinds of conversations. Trey Lance has gone down. You know, I think there's definitely a spot to be had. So, what do you think, Shaun? Do you think the Lions have got a route in?
I'm buying, mate. I'm with you. I'm all over it. I'm yet to be convinced at all by the Packers. I know they got a win this week, which we'll come on to later. But I think they beat who the real cellar dwellers are in that division in terms of the Chicago Bears this week. I've been massively impressed with the Lions. I think they were close in a number of games last year. Certainly, like you say, they picked up their few wins that they did manage to secure in the back end of the season. It does seem like Dan Campbell's message is very much getting across. I've got a friend who moved over to Detroit some years back, and he's adopted the Lions as his team since moving over the pond. And he says that, you know, how much the city's really buying into the philosophy and really enjoying the energy that Dan Campbell's bringing. I think you mentioned the offense. I think it starts up front. I think the offensive line is good. You win football games in the trenches, and that offensive line is good. Jared Goff has got his limitations. There is obviously no doubt about that, but he's also been able to take a team to the Super Bowl. He can be an efficient quarterback. And I think the reason that the offense probably goes under the radar is, like I've just said, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a rookie last year, not a name on everybody's lips, certainly not the casual viewers, you know, sort of thoughts of a premier wide receiver. But if you actually look at what he's producing, he's out producing near enough everybody not named Cooper Kupp at this moment in time. You know, he's phenomenal when in terms of what he's actually contributing. I think you look at the other side of the ball. I think Aiden Hutchinson obviously had a hell of a day yesterday. Picked up 3 sacks, didn't he, on his on the day? Obviously, massive expectations for him coming in as the second overall pick in the draft this year. But they are a young team. They're a team that is improving. I think there is definitely an opportunity within the NFC, as you say. I think, you know, I would suggest that Trey Lance going down probably improves the 49ers' chances, if I'm being honest. I don't know, Josh would share that opinion with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think in terms of elsewhere, you know, I would look around, and as you say, you know, the NFC East, the Cowboys were the ones that people expected to be there or thereabouts. Yes, they got a win this week, but there's question marks there. You know, the Rams, yeah, they got a win, but let's face it, they were pushed all the way by the Falcons in what was potentially another huge comeback, which fell just short, and haven't threatened to actually come to fruition. The Bucs have got question marks because of all of the injuries that they've got and all of those type of things. So look, I think there is definitely an opportunity there for the Lions to be in the conversation. But obviously, so much depends on whether or not the Green Bay Packers can actually find some consistent form. Like I say, I'm not taking week 2 as any sort of barometer for what they are or what they aren't, because I think the Bears will be really, really poor this year. But I think obviously the Vikings the Vikings were impressive week 1, big game for them tonight. Obviously, Packers disappointing week 1, corrected themselves week 2. But like I said, let's wait and see what comes around. It's a tough division, but the Lions are certainly a team that if I was a fan of them, I'll be encouraged that brighter days are certainly ahead. Whether those brighter days come at the end of this season or next, but they're certainly in the heading in the right direction.
Josh, you don't agree, do you?
Can I sell you guys some stock? If you're buying stock, I have stock to sell. Yeah, my main question here, though, Steve, is how many wins do you expect them to get? Because I understand why you're putting it out there. They are definitely a team on the rise, and they're definitely a team that has got some moxie about them, and is likely to get more wins, of which I definitely had them scheduled for this year, which is scary because I think they are featured on a couple of my win totals as an under, which is scary to me at the moment. But I currently pin them as a 7-win team as a ceiling still. So I don't know how many wins you think that they are likely to pick up now, whether that's an 8 or a 9 at this point.
Does 8 wins get you in the NFC? It's going to be tight, maybe, but probably 9.
Not.
Probably 9. So that means they need to win 8 more games, and they have games against the likes of Seattle, New England, Dallas,
better than
Chicago,
expected, less than expected.
Giants.
Dallas is a toss-up. Giants are potentially better than expected. Jags are better than expected. You can't look at the Lions in a vacuum.
But the Lions are better than expected, though. Do they not get the same
exactly?
But
that's what I'm saying to you. What I'm saying is that you can't look at them in a vacuum, though. The Jags just took apart the Colts. And I mean, took apart.
They did.
So you can't immediately scribble a dub in there for the Lions, because I look at the Jags right now and I think that the Jags pace the Lions. I just think that Washington are worse than expected. I think that that's something which we can definitely take from the first 2 weeks of the season. I think that the Lions padded their points column in week 1 against the Eagles. The Eagles were still relatively comfortable throughout that game. Come back to me in, say, 3-4 weeks and see if we're still saying the same thing. I think that the Lions have got tougher times ahead before their bye. And then the schedule definitely opens up after the bye, but there are other teams that are saying the exact same things as the Lions at the moment, and they play those as well.
I think if they don't, it's because of their defense. The defense is not great. Like, Aiden Hutchinson was not amazing in week 1. He had a bit of a breakout game week 2. And if they don't do it, it's because of their defense. They've allowed 38 and 27 points, respectively. That's a lot of points to be given up. You don't win many games allowing those types of points. And let's be real, they almost threw it away against Washington. They it really did look like the Commanders were going to, charge down there and make another comeback. So they almost did throw it away. But for me, they're an early team and I think there's a theme so far. They're an early team that they are better than I expected they were going to be. And I would have them in the conversation come like week 14, 15. You think, oh, actually, if these guys can win another 2 or 3 games, I think they're in. But whereas last year, the Detroit, you'd be surprised if they won 2 games, let alone 9.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, mate. I think that's a fair assessment. Like I said, they're certainly in the conversation. They're certainly trending in the right direction. Like you say, it's still early doors. It's still only week 2. As Josh said, let's see where they get to. They've got an early bye week after the next 3. Tough one next at Minnesota. They then got Seattle and New England. If they could be sitting at 3-2 come the bye week, they will be very, very happy indeed. So that's your first one ticked off, mate. Give us your second one.
Second one, I'm going to stay on the theme of the playoffs, but we're going to swap conferences. And this might not be necessarily such a surprise to some people, but I just want to heap some praise on the 2-0 Chiefs and say that I think the Chiefs are going back to the Super Bowl. That requires them to beat the Bills somewhere along the line, unless someone else does it for them. And I know we've all been very, very high on the Bills so far this season, but they've just been so good. Patrick Mahomes was so efficient against the Chargers on Thursday night. He looked polished. He looked confident. That little sidearm throw that they got the touchdown on was wonderful. And he looks like he slotted in with this new receiving corps pretty seamlessly. Tyreek Hill is gone. It doesn't seem to matter in Kansas City. Andy Reid's dialed up in the offense. Matt Nagy is the quarterback coach, which is really interesting. Because prior to becoming the head coach in Chicago, Matt Nagy actually had some pretty interesting jobs as quarterback coach and was regarded as a pretty successful quarterbacks coach. So it's interesting that they brought him in, and he seems to be doing some good things. But I think most importantly, their defense, the defense held firm. They had a young rookie cornerback, Jalen Watson, who apparently only 3 years ago was working alongside his mother at a Wendy's, but is now a cornerback for the Kansas City Chiefs, which is a wonderful story. And he took his first NFL interception back 99 yards for the score. And I just think the Chiefs look like the Chiefs of about 3 years ago. They look really good. I think that you're going to struggle to beat them. And when last year, we remember the Chiefs took, I think, was it 8 weeks to get to over 500 because they kept losing games that no one really expected them to. And they've just come across probably one of their hardest tests this season. And yes, it was a close game. And yes, Herbert got injured, but they came through it and they've got the W and they march on. And so I'm putting out there early, week 2. This is my early hot take that I think the Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl.
It's definitely a hot take. I came away from that game thinking that the Chargers are potentially more likely to come out of the AFC West on top than the Chiefs were. The Chargers went into Arrowhead, which is one of the hardest places to go to in all of American sports, seemingly, and almost treated it as their own playground for 3 quarters. And then it was only really when Herbert was basically pierced in the abdomen that anything really changed around. I actually think that Mahomes found it quite difficult to get stuff off. It only really gelled us when it really mattered most. I think they changed their they changed the calling a little bit. I think that even our resident Chiefs fan Liam, who does the Go for Two pod, he'd tell you that it was probably one of the worst called games by Andy Reid for a good long while. Way too run heavy. They're trying to divert away from the wide receivers as much because of the fact they don't have the confidence in them yet. And that's definitely something of which I found. They're definitely still working it out. So I think that right now, if you were to tell me who would win the AFC West, I would say the Chargers. And in terms of the Super Bowl, I can't see anything other than the Bills coming out of the AFC at the moment. The Bills have looked, just from what we've seen so far, it's going to be very, very difficult to see anything other than the Bills. And the Chiefs have not given me that confidence to say that they are going to be able to match up against them, if they even match up against them in the conference championship.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I think it's interesting that there's opinions that it was a really poorly called game by Andy Reid, but they still won. They still managed to find a way to win. And if you're contributing touchdowns from your defense, I think that's really important. It takes pressure off if your offense is not having the best game. Shaun, are you buying into that?
Yeah, listen, I'm buying into it in as much as I think the Chiefs are a more rounded team, I would say, this year. I think when we've criticised them in the past, it's been that they've been so reliant on that high-powered offense. And the Achilles heel has always been the fact that the defense has been, a fairly, I wouldn't say easy target, but, it's certainly been the weaker side of the ball by some considerable distance. I feel as though they're a much more rounded unit on the field this time around. The game itself on Thursday night, I think, was an example of good teams, successful teams that have been successful for a long time, find ways to win those type of ball games. And that's ultimately what the Chiefs did and what the Chargers have struggled to do for the longest time. I think our resident Chargers fan, Lee, would tell you that, believe it when you see it. And as much as, yes, the Chargers did look good for large portions of the game, ultimately they come out of there with the scoreboard the wrong way around from their perspective. You could look at the stats and say, well, the Chargers gained more yards and Herbert threw more yards and all of these kind of things. But ultimately, there's one stat in every game that matters, and that's the final score. And as you say, whether Reid called a good game, bad game, or in between, they ultimately found a way to get the job done. There's no denying that the pick six was obviously the absolute huge play of the game. I'm a huge fan of Brandon Staley. I'm a huge fan of coaches that are aggressive, but it was pretty obvious that Gerald Everett was calling for a substitution when they were running a no-huddle, up-tempo offense at that point. And, admittedly, they were obviously moving the ball, which obviously, was working for them, but to particularly target him on that play when he had signalled, look, I need a blow here, I need to come out. And you could tell by the effort or the lack thereof of effort, not only in terms of trying to secure the catch, but he didn't even attempt to try and run back and sort of make a tackle. And admittedly, the defender had obviously got a few yards on him at that stage, but he was just down on his haunches. And, ultimately that was the play that ultimately really swung the game in the favour of the Chiefs. But I think, I was very high at the start of the season on the Broncos. I thought their upgrade at quarterback would be huge. Let's be honest, through 2 weeks, it has been nothing short of woeful in Denver. You talk about coaches very quickly on the hot seat. Nathaniel Hackett could well be the shortest tenured head coach in history if things carry on the way that they are. Because my word, they were lucky to squeak a win yesterday. But look, in terms of the Chiefs, it all seems like a Buffalo Kansas City AFC Championship game, doesn't it? But that would be far too easy. We've sat here for 2 weeks and we've got nothing right. We've predicted nothing correctly. Something surprises us every week. Something will happen, and that game may well never come to fruition. But look, you know as well as I do that 16, 17 weeks from now, if that is the game, these two teams may well look totally different to what they look now anyway. And again, believe it when you see it. The Chiefs have done it consistently. Mahomes has done it consistently. I would trust him and I would trust that team if it gets to that stage. So I don't think it's too hot of a take at all, mate. And more importantly, in terms of the here and now, huge divisional win, because we talked about that division and divisional games in particular. A massive one. What's your third one, buddy?
So third, we're going to go with some of the downsides rather than the upsides. We've talked about teams making the playoffs. I think there's a few head coaches that are on the brink of outstaying their welcome in the NFL, shall we say, to put it lightly. I think there's a couple of guys that are looking fairly obvious as candidates to go first. You probably point to Matt Rule. His days are looking numbered. There's a couple of new guys that have really got off to a shaky start. Nathaniel Hackett's one. I think Mike McDaniel. Sorry, not Mike McDaniel. Las Vegas head coach. Why is his name escaping me?
Josh McDaniels.
Josh McDaniels. Sorry, beg your pardon. Not Mike McDaniel. Definitely not Mike McDaniel. Josh McDaniels. I think he's had a really rough start in Las Vegas. Is 0-2 with that Vegas team. But I think there's a couple of long tenured head coaches. I think hot seats are getting pretty hot, and I think there's a couple that might go mid-season. The first one is Cliff Kingsbury. And I know the Cardinals won, and I'm sure this is probably a good chance to talk about the Cardinals game. But they should not have won that game. That was how they won that game. I don't know. That Arizona offense has been asleep for the first 6 quarters of this season. They were dreadful last week. They looked awful in the first half this week. Kyler Murray was 31 of 49, averaged 5.7 yards a throw, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, quarterback rating of 66.9 on ESPN. It just really didn't look great until that fourth quarter and until he managed to keep plays alive with his feet, which, yes, is what he can do. And, yes, it's great to have that, especially, that 2-point conversion where he managed to run it in somehow, despite holding on to the ball for what felt like an eternity. But they had no right to win that game, and I think a better team would have put them to the sword and would be walking away with the win right now. I think Cliff Kingsbury has been walking a bit of a tightrope for a while, and when they had their enormous collapse towards the end of last season, as they seem to do lately, I think his days were looking numbered then. And I said at the start of the season, I said in our NFC West preview show that if they don't get off to a good start and if he doesn't make the playoffs this year, his days numbered. And if they continue like they are and they get to week 8 and week 9 and they're on 500 or sub, I think it's time to make a change. How can you keep you've got Kyler on his big monster contract now. He's locked down. You've got a good receiving core. Now I know they might be trying to get by until Hopkins comes back week 7. And I know that's obviously a massive piece to lose, and losing your wide receiver number 1 for the first 6 weeks is huge. And maybe if they are, 4-2 or 3-3, and he comes back and they turn into a good unit again, then that's signs that maybe they are. But they just don't look like a polished playoff team. They look like a team that even if they're going to make the playoffs, that one and done. I can't see them who they're going to beat. I don't see which NFC team they'd beat. I don't know where the offensive production's coming from. They've got a couple of decent receivers. Zach Ertz is always a reliable receiver. Marquise Brown looks like he's slotted in fairly well, but they were going to Greg Dortch a lot yesterday, and he had himself a decent game. But when James Conner's a 4th on your depth chart for receiving yards, and he's a running back, I just don't see where the offensive production is coming from. So for me, Cliff is one. I don't know what you guys think about him, but Cliff is one I think his days are numbered. The other one, I think, before I pass it over to you guys, is again probably fairly obvious to some, but the other one is Frank Reich, because the Colts were awful, absolutely dreadful yesterday. and they were shut out by Jacksonville. Well, that shouldn't be happening to any team, let alone Indianapolis. You shouldn't be being shut out full stop. You've got 4 quarters, 60 minutes to score at least 3 points, and they didn't score any. And Matt Ryan was dreadful. 16 of 30, 195 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, sacked 5 times. He had an ESPN QBR rating of 6.3. Not 55, not 65, 6.3.
6.3.
That's awful. Jonathan Taylor couldn't get anything going. I think he had that one long run for 21 yards. But apart from that, he was averaging somewhere around sort of 4 yards, 3 yards a carry. They got very little going in the passing game. The thing is now is that they've obviously had a different quarterback every season for the last 6 seasons or so. And last year, a lot of it was, it's all Carson Wentz. It's all Carson Wentz. And obviously, Wentz comes with his own issues. And they put a lot of the blame on him. And obviously, he's out of the building and he's gone. And they managed to get something from the Commanders for him. Wentz isn't there anymore. It's now Matt Ryan, who is a long-tenured, experienced quarterback who has been to a Super Bowl. Like, he's no pushover. He's not someone that's going to sort of take all the blame for all of this. So what happens in Indianapolis? Because, they don't even seem to be capable of winning their division, let alone winning a playoff game. So I think Frank Reich, they might start to get a bit sort of tense, and I think they might pull the trigger on Frank Reich. And Chris Ballard, for all that we've sung his praises over the years for some of the stuff he's done, surely they've got to start thinking about him as well, because this is the 6th or 5th quarterback since Andrew Luck, and it doesn't seem to. I know it's only 2 weeks in, but this looks awful. This offense, I don't know where they go from here.
Yeah, and let's also consider the fact that there's a massive issue with patience as well at this point. It feels like patience is being exhausted when you consider, the squads which the Colts have had, and you'd consider that the Colts have had really good playoff-worthy rosters now for a number of years, and they've either scraped by or just not done well enough, or there's always some sort of excuse. And at some point the front office has to take action. Frank Reich, I do think, is probably the most likely to go first. If we just take a look at the schedule, you've got here they're at home to the Chiefs, home to the Titans, away to the Broncos, home to the Jags again, and obviously, if the Jags do their number twice, that's damning enough. That's looking at mid-October by that point. They could easily lose all of those games. Then you've got the Titans away, and then Commanders at home, Patriots away. If they only end up getting 3 to 4 wins out of all of that set, and that's probably being optimistic considering their performances so far this year. He's gone by Halloween.
And that's alarming as well, because you look at that schedule and you think these were the 2 games that you had penciled in as wins. These were the 2 that you'd get to get them off the mark, and then they go into the Kansas City game, tough game, Tennessee, Denver, tough games. But instead they're 0-2 and could easily be staring at that Jacksonville game mid-October as 0-5. I could easily see that happening.
Easily. Yeah, it's bad, and you do wonder how quick they might press that trapdoor button, because do you press it at 0-5? That roster's not 0-5. That roster is nowhere near 0-5 bad. It's it's nowhere near 0-2 at this point. Matt Ryan's looked awful so far this season. That's not Matt Ryan. Even with the Falcons, he didn't look this bad. There is more at stake here, and it's the coaching. It's got to be.
And Matt Ryan's never looked this bad. He's had some dreadful Atlanta teams through his years, but he's never looked this bad. But Reich was plucked out of Philadelphia after their Super Bowl win. He was the offensive coordinator there, and he brought, he's brought in this new sort of way in Indianapolis. He's been there for 5 years now, and I don't see how the improvement comes. He was regarded as the Wentz whisperer who was going to get Carson Wentz back up and running. That didn't happen. Matt Ryan, the offense looks all over the place. I don't know where they go from here. And he's got to be looking over at Sirianni in Philadelphia, who came from Indianapolis, who was his offensive coordinator in Indianapolis. And Sirianni, first season, takes the Eagles to the playoffs. That depleted roster, that awful roster. And and they go to the playoffs under Sirianni, and now they're looking like a really good team in the NFC this season. So, troubling times for Reich. But Shaun, what do you think about the Cardinals? What do you think about Old Cliff in Arizona?
Yeah, I think, look, sometimes the results really do mask the problems, and I sort of stipulated that when we were talking about the game review earlier. In terms of, to answer your question directly, how on earth did they win that game? I've got no good answer. I've been sitting here for 5 minutes listening to Josh talk about Frank Reich, and I'm thinking, I've got no good answer for this. You look at that drive that actually tied the ball game up. And we said about the offense, it didn't get going until the fourth quarter. It didn't even get going in the fourth quarter. I'm just looking at this drive. Pass to AJ Green, no gain. Kyler Murray left end for 5 yards. Kyler Murray left end for 2 yards. Passing complete, passing complete, passing complete. The only time he actually completed passes were on 4th down and scramble plays. Now, to be fair, I suppose you that's when the best quarterbacks make the money and they pull it out when they need to, etc., etc. But it will only go on for so long. For me, they're a team that really struggling offensively without DeAndre Hopkins. Let's not forget that their star wide receiver is missing for the early part of this season. And they obviously have moved on from Christian Kirk as well. So 2 of the weapons that were there last year aren't suiting up to start out this year. Yes, they've obviously brought in Hollywood Brown from the Ravens, but let's face it, he wasn't exactly pulling up trees at the Ravens. And as you say, the fact that Greg Dortch seems to be getting as many targets as he is probably tells you all you need to know about how that transition is working out at the minute. James Conner had a lot of touchdowns last year. He relied heavily on short yardage stuff, but if you don't get him in and around the goal line, he's not a productive runner. He's never been a high yards per carry kind of back. And they haven't got one of those. James Conner's stat line for yesterday, 7 for 25. They got more plays, gadget plays out of Eno Benjamin than they got out of James Conner yesterday. So there's an awful lot of questions to be asked there. The one thing they did do well yesterday, and I've got to be honest, I haven't watched a ton of this game. I'm only going off the highlights that I've seen today in terms of what's on NFL Game Pass, and obviously looking at the stat line. Devontae Adams. Did somebody tell Derek Carr that the Raiders traded for Devontae Adams in the offseason? Two receptions for 12 yards. 2 receptions for 12. That has got to be Devontae Adams' worst stat line forever. Admittedly, it's obviously a new offense for Devontae Adams, but 2 for 12 yards just seems a ridiculously low stat line. And as you said earlier, Josh McDaniels not off to a great start at all, is he, in terms of what the Raiders have been able to put out. I think in terms to answer the question between the two, I think Frank Reich is the most likely to go sooner rather than later. I think Cliff Kingsbury is more likely to get a longer run at it. But I wouldn't be surprised if either of them survive come the end of the season. And it's like I said, we talked about this pre-season, didn't we? I think it's the level of expectation with these sides. If they don't make the playoffs and don't have decent runs in the playoffs, it gets to the point that, is making the playoffs enough? And actually, when you look at these teams, they do need to have sustained runs in the playoffs. I think just to touch on Indianapolis, just to throw my 2 pence worth in, I don't think the roster's probably as good as what we give it credit for. If you look at it, where are the stars? They've got some very good players. I'm not disputing that they've got some good players on the roster. But if you're looking for star power outside of Jonathan Taylor, who obviously, one of the premier, if not the premier running back in the NFL currently, there's no real superstar at wide receiver. Michael Pittman's their big receiver, if you like, in terms of what they expect from him. They've got nothing really at the tight end position. The offensive line is questionable, particularly trying to protect a immobile quarterback. I think Matt Ryan's took 7 sacks through the first 2 weeks. And defensively against Houston and Jacksonville, 2 teams that you, particularly at the start of the season, would have expected to be struggling. They've given up 300 yards of offense to the Texans, 330 yards of offense to the Jags, and look pretty toothless in doing so, to be honest. So lots and lots of questions within that. I think there are, like I say, some other coaches that are under immense pressure already, and it's a crazy world that we live in, isn't it? It's always a "what have you done for me lately" type of league. We mentioned some of the new coaches, and we'll touch on those as we go through. But yeah, so I think in terms of your 3 statements, mate, I think they're all very reasonable in terms of your thought process behind them. And as I say, certainly in terms of those coaches, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see some moves made sooner rather than later. Let's touch on some of the other games then that we haven't really talked about. Let's get a quick update first and foremost on the Pick'ems League. And where are we? Top of our table now. I'm pleased to say I've joined Josh at the top of the table, tied now on 19 points. It's a three-way tie at the top. Well, actually, do you know what? I actually quite like this new 888 version of the Pick'ems because you have to obviously get your score right, don't you? On Thursday Night Football, that becomes the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
So Johnny Boy Floyd leads the Pick'ems League at the moment, followed by Josh, followed by my good self. All three of us on 19 points. Although I will say I actually got Thursday Night Football bang on the money this week after getting it wrong by 28 points the week before.
Do you know, I was so pissed off that it just didn't take Justin Herbert out of the game, because then I would have been just the 1 point margin and you'd have been dragged so far away. I was gutted. Absolutely gutted.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda, my friend. You know, all of these things. But yeah, get involved in the Pick'ems League each week because it is a good bit of fun, isn't it? If nothing else, we all like to think we know something. And as we say each week, all it proves is that we all know absolutely nothing. So it's always...
he says joint top.
He says there, of course. Let's touch on some of these games then, fellas. I'm going to reel some of the scores off that we've sort of mentioned, but I haven't gone into great deals of depth, and I'll come to you for a little bit of commentary on them. We've obviously already mentioned the Chiefs 27, Los Angeles Chargers 24, New York Jets 31, Cleveland 30, Cincinnati 17, Dallas 20. I pushed the panic button last week. Josh told me not to push it. Josh, is this more of actually the panic button needs to go to Cincinnati and the most sacked quarterback in the history of the game?
So it depends as to what you mean by panic. If you listened to me at the start of the season and didn't buy into the Bengals hype to start with, you'd have seen that this was actually something to be aware of anyway. The Bengals are just starting to get the rub of the green the other way now. There are things of which are, of which would have gone for them last year, of which did not go for them, either yesterday or last week. You're going to get it. The offensive line has not been resolved, of which is a huge issue, especially for Joe Burrow. I am wondering whether or not to trademark Burrow, the Joe Burrow Resignations podcast, much in the same vein as the Athletics Andrew Luck podcast from earlier this offseason, because the more I look at it, the more I see the Andrew Luck story in Joe Burrow. The guy's just getting hit left, right, and center and can't make moves. And, they've played two solid defenses so far. So they've played the Steelers and the Cowboys. You can say what they like about their offenses at the moment, especially with, Cooper Rush and Mitch Trubisky being the two quarterbacks that they've played against. But they are solid defenses. So I wouldn't push the panic button yet, but I also wouldn't be surprised by their slow start either.
The other thing, just quickly on the Bengals as well, is that they were a Super Bowl team last year, and they tooled up. Like a lot of the players they added, they didn't really sort of lose too many, and they've added better players. They shored up the offensive line, or at least they thought they did. They got players back healthy, and they looked like on paper a better team, ready to go back again. And they just looked the opposite of that. Joe Burrow's holding onto the ball too long. The offensive line is literally in tatters and is really struggling to get that chemistry going. The Pittsburgh defensive line, yes, absolutely. Obviously, that's a stellar defensive line. The Dallas defensive line, outside of Micah Parsons, there's not a huge amount there, in terms of their defensive line. And they still took him down, was it 6 times in the first 3 quarters, something like that? So, for me, I wonder as well if this is a bit of... is Zach Taylor being found out a bit as well? The questions need to be asked about him, because I was always dubious of Zach Taylor, and I think last season might have been a bit of a flash in the pan. And actually, the Bengals are in for a long slog this season. And I think if it weren't for some of the results in the division, they could be looking at a really tough climb back. But luckily, the other teams in the division didn't fancy playing yesterday either, so we got to be lucky.
Yeah, so just one thing really quickly whilst we're on that, and it's something really interesting. If you can look back to some tweets from last week in regards to Cincinnati media, etc., and Pittsburgh media, there's a tell where if Joe Burrow goes under center, it's getting ran. Whereas if he goes in the gun, then it's likely to get past, and that got found out most times against Pittsburgh, and I believe it was something which carried on a lot yesterday as well.
Yeah, they've certainly got some things to clear up there. I mean, just to add to it, it's becoming almost laughable now how bad that offensive line play is. Most sacks taken by a quarterback since the start of the 2021 season. Admittedly, Joe Burrow went to the playoffs, but he has taken 83 sacks since the start of last season. Next worst, Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield tied with 49. So he's taken 34 more sacks than anybody else. It just can't carry on if the Bengals do want to get back to a Super Bowl. But more importantly, if they want to protect the franchise in terms of the long term, they really do need to start protecting him better.
He's already torn an ACL as well. He can't do it again.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Next three on the agenda, we've touched on a couple of them already. Detroit 36, Washington 27, Jacksonville 24, Indianapolis a goose egg 0. Denver 16, Houston 9. Steve, touch on the coaches under pressure. Kind of said it in jest because it's surely unrealistic to think a coach 2 games into his career would be under pressure. But the fact that the home fans had to actually count down the play clock so that the offense didn't take further delays of game, it really is a very, very poor start to the Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett era in Denver, isn't it?
It's like both teams left their offenses on the bus in the first half because it was just a defensive game for the first 40 minutes, really, and nothing got going. Hackett is making rookie errors as head coach that you shouldn't be making as a head coach. That delay of game on the 4th that is then turned into a punt rather than a field goal attempt is criminal. That is like page 1 of the textbook. How could you possibly have a delay of game in that scenario that then changes it into a punt rather than a field goal? Now, they still won the game, and in the grand scheme of things, 3 points didn't make a huge difference, but it's just the culture of the team. You don't want to be known as the coach that's making silly mistakes like that. Yes, he's a new head coach, and yes, he's probably finding his feet, but it's alarming for Denver. And I think, Russell Wilson is not playing his greatest ball as well. Now, obviously, it's going to take some time. He's been in Seattle for was it 12 years, 11 years, something like that. It's been a long time in Seattle. It's a change of scenery. There's going to be a lot of settling in. And also as well, I don't think this Denver team have been helped by some of the injuries they've had as well. Obviously, before the season, they lost Tim Patrick, which is an awful loss because I think he's one of the key pieces of that offense. Jerry Jeudy went down pretty early on and didn't return. Pat Surtain went down on the defense pretty early on, didn't return. So they've had some pretty poor injury luck. I will give them that, but they need to figure things out and quickly because, like you said, Shaun, this was your team that you sort of backed to be, runaway. Well, maybe not runaway, but divisional winners in this really, really tough division. And right now, they are not showing anything of the sort that they could be divisional winners.
No, absolutely, mate. 13 penalties for 100 yards. That tells you all you need to know. A lot to clean up in Denver. But the first win on the board for Hackett and Wilson. Moving through some more games. Tampa Bay 20, New Orleans 10. Probably more memorable, though, Josh, for the fight that happened rather than anything in the actual game itself, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I was watching this with the missus. She won the TV battle considering it was on Sky, so I had to watch the Browns game on my laptop while this played on the big screen. And pretty much throughout the entirety of the game, this was a game of which it was a tale of defenses. It was one where the Saints did what the Saints do well against the Bucs, which is just work out Tom Brady and just apply a lot of pressure on him. Tom Brady actually at one stage actually threw his Microsoft Surface into the bleachers. That's how frustrated he got. I think that we caught him saying about 6 or 7 expletives on camera, all the rest of it. And Mike Evans actually probably with the play of the game decides to run from the sideline, deck. Was it Marshawn Lattimore? Was it? I think it was. He could talk about blindside block. He completely decked him. Both obviously getting ejected from the game. I think they're both out for a week now. as well. But what it seems to do, what hockey fights tend to do for teams, which is just give them a bit more of a go get them sort of thing. And the Bucks from that point on seemed comfortable. they started to get into a rhythm, and that's with Evans off the team. I don't know if it's because they obviously didn't know who to mark out the game, because Evans was double covered most of the game to that point as well. So Evans playing almost a hockey style enforcer there, but it did summer. I refuse to believe it didn't do something to cajole them.
Yeah, it was like the typical 0-0 in football where the commentator says this game needs a goal. That game needed a fight, didn't it, to sort of spark it to life? So
and they've got history as well. They've got history. They showed it as well. I think Evans punched his helmet clean off last time, or something, or the other way around. Last season, that it needed a suspension, I think, to actually calm that down going forward. I think next time they'll think twice, maybe, potentially.
Well, it's a one-game ban as it stands. We'll see if it holds up, because I think he's going to appeal it. Let's crack on with a few more real snooze fest in terms of New England 17, Pittsburgh 14, and another snooze fest, Carolina 16, the Giants 19. Steve, 4 really poor offenses here. The Giants quite possibly one of the worst 2-0 franchises ever. If we're being honest, Carolina look dreadful. Pittsburgh offensively look dreadful. 4 teams here that essentially not really a great deal of positives to find for any of these at the minute, is there?
No, I think Pittsburgh to begin with. I think it sounds like fans and pundits are counting down the days till we see Kenny Pickett. Some people suggesting that week 4 might see him take the field, and the Steelers are not going anywhere with Mitch Trubisky. And I think Chicago fans could have told you that, But this the Steelers' offense is lacking at the moment, and Deontay Johnson's probably one of their only bright sparks in an otherwise pretty lackluster offense at the moment, whilst Trubisky's at the helm. And take TJ Watt out of that defense, and all of a sudden it looks pretty lackluster, because as much as they do like to take the ball when it comes to interceptions, if you give it back to the offense, if they can't score on the interception and turn it into a 6-point defensive play, the offense can't seem to score either. So, troubles in Pittsburgh. It was weird seeing it popped up on Red Zone every now and again, and it was weird seeing a New England Pittsburgh game that is in the post Brady Roethlisberger era. Having two quarterbacks that at the moment are fairly average. Mac Jones is, I think he's a certainly better quarterback than Trubisky, but at the moment he's not really lighting the world alight. And Trubisky is, I think everyone's seen enough of Trubisky to know that he's a pretty low level starting quarterback right now. So it's sort of weird to see those two going at it, and Brady and Roethlisberger being nowhere near it. But one thing I will just give some props to is Nelson Aguilar's catch in the end zone for that touchdown. What a catch. Absolutely wonderful grab behind the defender. Sort of the defender gets his arms up there and just whiffs. He hasn't catching the ball, just does as best he can. It's just a hell of a catch. Really, really good catch. So give him credit for that. And in terms of the other game, you're right. I think I will give the Giants props. They're 2-0. I did not have them 2-0. This is the first time the Giants have started the season 2-0 since the boat picture. We all remember the famous boat picture that they took with OBJ and the likes on the boat. This is the first time the franchise has gone 2-0 since that photo was taken. But I agree, they look like the biggest fraudulent 2-0 team so far. I think it's been 2 pretty lucky wins, and the first game week 1 against Tennessee, they managed to come away after Tennessee missed the field goal, so lucky not to lose that one. And this one, I think any other offense other than Carolina, and they would have lost this game quite handily. I think the offense is still trying to figure out who it is. Interestingly, that Kenny Golladay, the guy that got the big monster contract not this offseason, the one just gone, was barely involved. I don't even think he was involved today. Certainly didn't get any targets. And his locker was apparently cleared out, and he'd left the stadium before the press even got in there after the game. So don't know what's going on there. But Kenny Galladay's time in New York could potentially be numbered. But when their biggest receiving threats are Richie James and Davis Sills V, just shows you sort of how things are changing in New York. And obviously Saquon Barkley had a big game, but I'm the first to point out in the NFC East of running backs that relied on too heavily. Because look at what's happening to Zeke Elliott. His production's fallen off a cliff in the last year or two because his legs are shot, because he's played so many snaps in that Dallas offense. If they're not careful, Saquon Barkley will do the same, because he's already had a season-ending injury once. He's a great player, don't get me wrong, but they need to manage him and they need to make sure that they're not overloading him. And, their other rushing threats were Daniel Jones for 21 yards. And Matt Brady had -4 rushing yards. So let's not give too much stock to him. So yeah, 4 pretty lackluster offenses, 4 pretty abysmal offensive performances. But those 2 teams that count with wins will be pleased to just get one in the W column, I think.
Yeah, no, they all count the same, don't they, at the end of the day? But yeah, certainly question marks around all 4 of those. Green Bay back to winning ways, 27-10 over Chicago. We said Aaron Rodgers owns the Bears. I think the Bears are going to be pretty poor this year. I'm not buying too much into what Green Bay did. Again, pretty poor effort in terms of what the receivers generated. Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon seem to beat the Packers' offense this year, don't they? Let's be honest, they combined to put up around about 240 of the total team yards. So, still question marks for me in terms of Green Bay. Some of the others that we haven't yet mentioned, the Falcons gave the Rams a bit of a scare, didn't they? That was nearly another one to add to your comeback list, Josh. 31-27 in the end. But that one got a bit tasty towards the end, didn't it?
Yeah, it was one of those ones a bit like the Jets-Browns game where a lot had to happen and they were going for it. Everything seemed to fall for them, but they gave themselves far too much to try and go at. But the Falcons on their day are they are tasty. They've got some playmakers and they can do some stuff. They just left themselves too big of a hole to go after.
Yeah, definitely. Drake London's made a nice start to his NFL career, getting more percentage of a team's targets than anybody else at the minute in the NFL. He caught 8 balls this week. And I did like the fact that the Rams were literally running scared through the back of their own end zone at the end after having a previous punt block. It was very intelligent.
That was a very, very intelligent play because they give away the safety and then they have to kick a free kick ball. So that's actually a really, really smart play from Sean McVay. They were talking about it on the Gamecast and I was like, yeah, that's a really, really intelligent play.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very intelligent, but also quite funny that they were literally running from the Atlanta Falcons to secure the victory at the end.
Yeah.
In terms of securing victory, pretty straightforward for San Francisco, 27-7 over Seattle. And the big story in this one, obviously, is the fact that Trey Lance went down early in the game, confirmed today, broken ankle and surgery, which will mean the end of his season before it's even really got started. Of course, Jimmy G came in to pick up the pieces, instantly led a touchdown drive, and the 49ers back in the win column. Mentioned it at the outset. Steve, just very quick answer on this one. Do the 49ers win more games now Jimmy G is under center than they would have done with Trey Lance, yes or no?
No.
Josh?
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought you might have a split opinion on that one. Yeah, he's a polarizing character, but look, absolute masterstroke, it's got to be said now, from the San Francisco front office to not trade him away, because obviously he potentially will be the starting quarterback for the next 13 weeks, and we've deliberately left it till last. Josh kind of mentioned it earlier, but I think we need to put a little bit of special praise on this one. The Baltimore Ravens 38, the Miami Dolphins 42. Just an incredible fourth quarter. 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter alone. The first time in NFL history that 2 wide receivers go for over 150 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns in terms of a duo on the same team, in terms of Hill and Waddle. The stat line's ridiculous for both of them. Hill 11 for 190 and 2 touchdowns. Waddle 11 for 171 and 2 touchdowns. Tua Tagovailoa ends with 6 TDs, 469 yards. Lamar Jackson has himself a day, 21 of 29 for 318, 3 touchdowns, also 119 rushing yards and a touchdown. I mean, this was just a crazy, crazy, crazy game. If you'd have switched on at the end of the third quarter, you'd have thought that the Baltimore Ravens were just, enjoying a very routine victory. But boy, oh boy, did this game come alive in the fourth quarter, Steve.
Yeah, the Ravens were up by 21 points as the fourth quarter started, which means that the Dolphins set a new team record for the largest fourth quarter comeback in their history. So that was a Dolphins franchise record. They are also the first team to accomplish that feat in over 12 years. That's how unlikely it all was that they were going to come back. And I remember seeing this on Red Zone and thinking, wow, the Ravens have really sort of put the Dolphins to the sword today. This Ravens team looks like a really good team. I thought that Lamar was increasing his guaranteed money with every single snap that he played because he looked unstoppable. And to be fair to Lamar, I don't think this was his fault. I don't think he could have really done any more. If you're an offensive, if you put 38 points up on the board, 99 times out of 100, you'd expect to win the game. You'd hope that your defense can hold the opposing offense to 37 points and you could walk away with the win. So I don't think Lamar could have done a huge amount more, but they just couldn't stop that offense in the fourth quarter. Waddle was excellent. Tyreek Hill looked quiet for the first quarter or so, but then lit it up. There was that one play where he was wide open in the back in the secondary of the Ravens, and I just don't know how he was left so open. Must have been a busted coverage, but he was so open. And Tua looked really, really good in that fourth quarter. I've seen him compared to the old style sort of Dan Marino, brings in that sort of flash of brilliance, and just this is what the Dolphins can look forward to if they've got him under center and him at quarterback. And it was just such an exciting finish. I just didn't think it was going to happen, and then it did. It ain't over till it's over, and they were absolutely excellent. And what a game! What an advert for the league. And I think Sky will be absolutely kicking themselves if they picked the other game to the show, because this was clearly the one that should have been on TV.
Yeah, it certainly should have been. Josh, I'm just going to reel off for you, mate. We could talk about blown coverages and the Ravens throwing it away and everything, but look, I want to finish this podcast on a positive, and let's heap the praise on the Dolphins here. These last 4 drives, 75 plays in 3 minutes. 75 plays.
Wow. Let's go.
That's a drive and a half. 75 yards in 3 minutes 14. 59 yards in 1 minute 24. 64 yards in 1 minute 27. 68 yards in 2 minutes and 4 seconds. I've just roughly calculated that in my head. That's around 8 minutes of play, 4 touchdowns. What an explosion. Everybody in the AFC, we keep talking about the Bills. Look, this is the week 3 matchup I'm going to finish the podcast on in a minute. It's Bills versus the Dolphins in week 3. That has got to be the Sky game at 6 o'clock. Got to be the Sky game at 6 o'clock. What did you think of this offense? Exactly. What did you think of this yesterday? And then we'll finish the podcast with a quick look towards week 3 and that game in particular.
So on that one, the offense was very Jekyll and Hyde. I thought in the first half, the Miami offense was terrible. Couldn't get anything going. Tua looked off. Could barely hit a man in stride. They couldn't seem to get anything past the line. Baltimore were all over them. And realistically, that sort of kept up until that fourth quarter, and then everything just seemed to work perfectly for them. They were able to hit their guys, hit the guys wherever they were going. Tua's arm was suddenly gold. You just got to be able to keep that up consistently. We've said from the offset that Miami's offense, in terms of roster, is really good this year, and there is no reason as to why they can't, reel off these sort of performances over the course of an entire game, not just the one quarter. But credit to them for being as aggressive as they were and still able to get the job done. They didn't require quite the magician's tricks as maybe the Jets did, for example, but they were able to, just be able to constantly get back. And then also hats off to the Miami defense as well. You're not able to get this level of, just constant drives in the fourth quarter without being able to get the ball back quickly. And that's what the defense did. They stood up to Baltimore at a time where realistically they could have just rolled over and gone, we're done. We've had a crap day at the office, and completely performed a 180. So hats off to both sides of the ball there.
And just quickly as well, that Baltimore defense is no pushover. That's not just some awful defense. That Baltimore defense is arguably one of the best in the league. Marcus Williams, Marlon Humphrey, Chuck Clark, Patrick Queen, Marcus Peters, Carl Hamilton. Just list off some of those names, and those are all really, really good players. And they just fell apart. What a game.
Yeah, stunning game. I've mentioned that that's on the docket for week 3. Let's have a quick look at some of the others for week 3. Browns Steelers open up Thursday night football. You've either got to be a Browns fan, a Steelers fan, or on drugs to stay up Thursday night to watch that football game. That's all I'm going to say. Unfortunately, I fall into at least one of those categories, so I will probably be up watching it. But yeah, not exactly a thriller. Dolphins Bills headlines the early slate in terms of Sunday. Also, Vikings Lions could be a tasty one to watch in the early window as well. Late games probably highlighted by Buccaneers Packers in the 9:25 slot. And then we have Sunday night football, Broncos 49ers. Monday night football next week is Giants Cowboys. Of course, we've still got 2 games left this week, and I'll be amiss not to ask Steve about how he's feeling ahead of Eagles Vikings tonight. The second part of the overlapping double header Monday night football, which I'm still scratching my head around. Apparently, there's going to be a little box inside the coverage of each game showing what's going on in the other game, which I'm not sure whether that's going to help or hinder, if I'm being completely honest. But yeah, Bills Titans starts us off tonight at midnight. Eagles Vikings thereafter at 1:30. How are you feeling about tonight, buddy? Confident?
Yeah, it's going to be a real test. I didn't think that this would be such a massive test. The Vikings are always a sort of a good test for the Eagles, but Kevin O'Connell had such a good performance last week against the Packers that it's got me a bit nervous, and I'm just a bit nervous about how this Eagles defense handles the likes of Justin Jefferson, the likes of Dalvin Cook. We really struggled to stop the run last week against the Lions, so I think that could be an interesting sort of matchup there. But I would back the Eagles offense to put on a similar number of points just because of how explosive it is. Look for Devonta Smith to get involved in the game more. Look for AJ Brown to get involved up the middle. Dallas Goedert getting those slants in the middle of the field, and that triple-headed running attack as well. So really, really interesting game. I'm going to be getting up for it because I think this is going to be a real tasty one. I think back in sort of April, May time when the schedule came out and you were looking at this game, you're thinking, oh, it's not really sort of a big sort of Monday Night Football, but now it's here. I think it's actually a really interesting one, a really good one for the neutral as well. So should be a good one. I think it'll be high scoring, and I think the Eagles' home field advantage should take it. I think it's going to be a close one, 27-24 for my Birds.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a close one. I think in terms of that, I think 52% of people in the pick'ems have gone for the Eagles, 48% for the Vikings. It really is a coin flip kind of game. So yeah, it should be a real good one. In terms of our coverage for the rest of the week, we are now the home of American football all week long. You can catch the Go for Two podcast, part now of the Full 10 Yards Network. We're delighted to have the boys signed up and part of what we're producing there here at the end of the week, Thursday or Friday, to give you the previews for the games ahead in a bit more depth as we do more of the review stuff on a Monday. So catch the boys delivering that. And also, if you do like to have a little flutter, make sure you check out the Full 10 Yards Betting podcast. Plenty of good advice there from the boys. As they obviously look into what the bookies are offering if you want to have a cheeky 50 pence each way on someone to score a touchdown at the weekend, or maybe a little bit more if you're that way inclined, but always gamble responsibly. The boys will tell you all of that anyway. If you tune in, you won't be disappointed. Fellas, we'll be back next week, of course, to review everything going down in week 3. It's been a pleasure as always. We hope you've enjoyed week 2 of the NFL. And we will see you all again this time next Monday to review week 3. Until then, enjoy your week, and we will see you soon.